and Legacy Management Committee. I'm Dan Kaminsky, Chair. We have Dave Lavakis just stepped to the back. He's the Vice Chair. Committee members, everyone knows our committee members. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming out this evening and spending some time with us, because I know it's been a long wait since the last committee. It was like hours ago. Do we have anything else up on there? All right, so tonight we will be talking about our open recommendation number 351. And we have 0 pending, and right now 0 drafts. So with that, let's bring up Zach Todd to give us our update.
Hello, everyone. So Zach Todd, DOE. Did everyone get a sheet that I passed out with the numbers? Everyone? Good. You need one?
We got one of those.
I got one.
All right, thanks for bearing with me there. It's just a little bit easier to talk about numbers when you got them in front of you. So for fiscal year 19, I know last month you guys had John Lopez actually kind of give an overview of the budget, the process, and kind of where we were then. I think the hour after he finished, we got our House and Senate marks. So these have been public information for about a month now, but these are the first time I'm sharing with you outside of Gil. Gil apparently has briefed them to the Rotary Club and a couple other folks right now. So the way this works is you have your fiscal 18 year, if going from left to right, looking at the columns, you got the fiscal year 18 EM request. So, and then you have our, what we actually got for the 18 is our execution. Then you just see a column there for the delta. The 19 EM request, that's the president's budget. Everyone's kind of heard how favorable that budget was towards Savannah River. Well, we got a plus up and we were kind of looking at different things. Now the HOOD is the House Energy Water Development, I think the D stands for, Mark. That's where Congress kind of goes through and does their puts and takes. And then the SUD is the Senate marks. That's where the Senate kind of goes through their puts and takes. As you can kind of look down through the HOODs and the SUDs, neither of those were very favorable for us compared to the president's budget. So that delta, those red numbers, those are compared to the 19's president's budget. The HOOD, it was about a $116 million difference. The SUD, about a $73 million difference. The HOOD just kind of picked on liquid waste there, while the House actually took a little bit from all the different programs. So, and then the other of note is the PILT. You'll kind of see that number around the 4.7, and that's absent. The PILT is absent. So that's kind of the update for fiscal year 19. For fiscal year 20, we submitted our initial need and target-based budgets. We'll get to you. Okay, all right.
You said 20, you got me.
Yep. So I'm not going to give you anything good. So we submitted our initial need and target-based budget. So really there's two different, there's the what we want to have, like as far as like what we can justify based off of the program. And then we also get like a target. And that target is usually built off of previous year budgets. So, so we gave them all the numbers. We're kind of working through all the narratives and the justifications and stuff. So through the coming months, we'll kind of go through that development, and that'll lead to the presidential's budget request next year. So coming to the strategic plan, no good news. So we actually had EM1, Anne-Marie White. She visited Savannah Riverside, I believe, it was a week ago. My organization got a little bit of one-on-one time with her. We were talking about the strategic guidance and like trying to figure out like planning and how to be the most effective at that as we can. She's a very analytical person. She's actually had a lot of experience. She was a contractor, and she has a lot of experience actually scheduling projects. So she kind of looks at things from that lens. Very analytical, very matter-of-fact, very precise. So what right now is what she's trying to do is actually get a software suite that kind of takes in all the logic and schedules all the processes and kind of takes them at a corporate level, EM, and put them in this computer. system, and this computer system is going to kind of calculate the best ways to do things. You would think that's kind of like would be intuitive, but actually when you kind of like you have these thousands of different processes and all these different connections through different programs and stuff, it gets very, very difficult to find the best, the most precise way. And by best, we typically talk about the best value. And then you kind of like overlay like, you know, the budget constraints and stuff like that. It gets even more like difficult. So this software, we're kind of hoping, she's hoping that it kind of really kind of paves the way, that we're able to take all this information to our congressional committees and like show them like, hey, this is the best way to accomplish these tasks. And then the idea is hope with like budget and funding. But so I say all that to say this: she's looking at getting that software suite. She's trying to understand which way she's going to go, and then she's talked about the strategic vision, trying to figure out like what all it means. She doesn't know where she wants to go just yet. She's getting a pretty good idea though. And then once she comes out with her strategic guidance, her strategic plan, we'll piggyback off what she says. All right, coming to the military. That picture that I gave you guys, and I realized that I messed up. There was supposed to be on the back of that like a bigger picture showing you where that is on the site. So there's not. So my bad. That's in B area. It's actually, if you know where the cloverleaf is in B area, it's really just south and a little bit west of that cloverleaf. And what's actually happening is the South Carolina National Guard is going to be refurbishing a parking lot from us. Where all those trees and stuff are, that's actually where a parking lot was. So they're going to come in here, clear that out, take away all the debris and heavy shrubs, and refurbish it with gravel instead of paving it. But a project for us, free, didn't cost us anything outside of some gravel, so pretty big win for the site, and the unit gets to do some training as well. In addition to that project, they're actually refurbishing a 4,000 square foot facility down at Gun Site 51. If you recall, Gun Site 51 is where the National Lab hosts a lot of Homeland Defense type trainings. We're hoping, like, when they're going through this 4,000 square foot facility, they're kind of like reconfiguring it to provide some classrooms and stuff like that. And we're hoping the National Lab is kind of able to utilize that facility when they're hosting the FBI and a lot of the Homeland Defense type agencies and stuff for the training that they do down there. And so it'll kind of facilitate and help them out. And then military there's been several training exercises throughout the site through June, mostly like small unit types, operating in D area, which is like the powerhouse and pump house west of 125. And then lastly, the EM liability. I know I've brought this up several times. I'm hoping it gets a little bit of traction because like it provides so much insight to like what we're trying to do at the site. It's the EM liability and really the ILCE life cycle. What the ILE does is it's a total cost for the site from today all the way through when we close, relating to EM's mission. So as far as closing down the tank farms, getting out, like doing all the spent nuclear fuel, processing all the fuels, using H Canyon, all the closures and stuff with the facilities, it actually goes into this elaborate plan that we come up and we total up a cost and make a schedule for. And it'll kind of show you a very rough, because things change, there's budgets, changes, new technologies are developed, things are constantly changing. That's why we have to update this every year. But we're actually finishing our update for this year. And this is something that's actually audited by KPMG, like the one of the big four accounting firms that kind of come in and validate this. And it kind of goes on to the government's books as a liability. So it shows how much money we're projecting to spend at Savannah River site until we close. It's kind of like where I think that the CAB would want to see some of that stuff. It's just kind of, again, an overarching strategic vision, absent of a strategic plan. This is like something that you can kind of gain some insight from. So that's kind of my update right now. Is there any questions?
Yeah, let's start with Dave.
So, Dave Vavakis, CAB. So, Zach, what is the status of the strategic plan?
Stand by. That's yeah. So again, EM1, she came down. She's incredibly intelligent. I'm not just saying that because she's like my boss, but so she's very, very much a very analytical and very like process-driven person, and she's trying to figure out all those connections and stuff right now. And that's where I was talking about that software program. bottom line is right now there's so many processes and there's so many relationships between things. It's very difficult for us in the aggregate view to say, hey, this is the most effective course of action. And what she's trying to do is assemble and use the software suite to kind of come up with that. And from there, and this is a little bit of guessing on my part, is where she's going to be coming out with her vision and her path forward, where she sees EM going.
Has DOE released their plan yet?
DOE?
Yeah.
Like big
Like
DOE?
department.
I looked on their website, I think it was a couple months ago, and I don't think they
Well,
did.
no, it wasn't out there a
Yeah,
couple
okay.
months ago. I haven't checked the last few
okay.
days. But,
okay, yeah. It was a couple months ago. I knew this conversation was going to come up, and I was looking a couple months ago, and I didn't remember seeing it.
David Vox, Cabinet. Regarding your chart for FY19 EM funding, I did some research today looking at some of the websites that I was familiar with from my past life, and it looks as though that what I'm reading is there would be a possible what they call a minibus for the appropriations bill. In the past, last year they had an omnibus. All the bills went together, and this time they would send a couple of the appropriations subcommittee bills at a time and pass them that way. Of course, the President Trump has said that he would never sign another omnibus. Now, energy and water has passed the House, and that bill is ready to go to the Senate. The Senate has not passed their bill yet. So, but the Senate is planning to stay for August. The House is not likely to stay, and what I'm reading is that there's a likely CR, but of course the President has said that he may not sign a CR, that there may be a shutdown. He's threatened that. And then we have the election season coming. So things are probably unlikely by October 1st, the start of the FY19 fiscal year.
Yeah. Everything you said is pretty factual. I can tell you that there's been significant movement within the government this year to not let a CR happen. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. Because once things get on that level, it's just kind of outside of our control. But there has been significant efforts within our organization, and you can see the movement through like the committees and stuff to get things done at an earlier rate to avoid a CR.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Zach around the table?
Yeah. Unless you
Gil?
have some. Zach, how do we get the House educated? Because, we know about STU. Thankfully, they kept STU 7 funded. But we know once salt waste processing gets up and going, it's going to fill rapidly. And so they gutted 8 and 9, which is going to make this beautifully new big facility stop, right?
Yeah. So they're aware. They understand this.
The House does.
They understand this. So the way that it works is when we get these marks and stuff, we'll actually get an opportunity, and this is what we're working right now, is to appeal. And what we do is in these appeals, we actually document the impacts and say, hey, if it's this dollar amount, this is what happens, X, Y, and Z. And if that was an impact, that would be highlighted within that document that's sent back to the committees. So there is that opportunity. I know in the past, working through our EM headquarters, they're constantly talking to these committees, and they're briefing them and educating them on these type of issues. So they have a understanding of our processes and the interrelationships and stuff.
And do they realize that we had a strike last year by our security? I mean, when I start looking at the numbers, we had a strike. I mean, Sincera strike had a strike. They're cutting safeguards and security. STU 8 and 9 is being cut.
So
Nuclear material stabilization and disposition is being cut. Liquid tank waste is being cut significantly. These are core things to South Carolina.
So a little history, like, and I probably didn't do the best job explaining this, with the PBS 20, Safeguard and Security, the $20 million cut in the HOOD section, you'll actually see a line item that pops up there right beneath it, the Argus, the $10 million. So it's not necessarily just a $20 million cut. They took $10 million out of it and put it towards that Argus, which is like one of our security systems. But it was what it ends up being is a $10 million cut to PBS 20, not a $20 million. Not that makes it too much better, but just.
That's fine. Okay, thanks, man.
Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, Cab. Did the other sites get comparable cuts?
No.
Not at all.
Good to know.
Most of the EM sites were actually plussed up.
When was the last time you asked for money and someone gave you more than you asked for?
Not just a little bit either.
Like 10, 20, 30?
81%.
81%.
So what do we do about it? So what can we do?
Well, obviously, we're going to be talking about the budget proposal or the budget overview that John Lopez presented. That's actually next on the agenda. But, yeah, I think something has to come of that.
So I kind of want to point out one thing. It's not that I think you're wrong. Trust me, I live this almost daily. And I get to hear the wrath of the programs, Jim Folk, almost on a daily basis. But you got to remember that this delta, that number there, is the difference between the presidential's requests and the marks. So if you kind of look at the fiscal year 18 execution, that 1471 number, and then you look at what the Senate and House marks are, both of them, in fact, are plus-ups from the previous year. Now, we did not get the president's request, and that's where those deltas come from. And that's what we measure the plus-ups and takes from, is the 19 request. But, in fact, we still do get a plus-up from 18 to 19. I know you're not going to sleep any better, Gil, but...
You did your job.
You're what?
You gave the statement.
Say it a little bit louder.
You did your job, you gave the statement.
David?
Zach, of the enacted FY18, the 1.5 billion, I guess that is.
Correct.
How much of that is pension? And then the 19, the request, the 1.7 billion, how much of that is pension?
I wouldn't be able to tell you off the head, top of my head. I know you recently got the pension tables, and I believe that kind of showed the aggregate pension and PRBs, and then there's the EM portion of that. I'd have to go back and look at that table to give you an accurate number.
Do you know the amount of the increase year over year?
So I can tell you it's peaking in the years like 23 to 24. It kind of gets up to that 250, 260 million with PRB.
How about 19 over 18?
Okay.
I
can have an is that in there?
If you look on Lopez's presentation, he had a pension contribution in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were, the pension was adjusted, the numbers were adjusted on the recommendation we had that we voted for in Savannah to reflect the numbers that John shared with us.
So jumping 18 to 19.
Just give us a number.
40 million.
It jumped 40 million?
94 to 133.
So just under 10% of the actual budget. It's
More questions on that, Dave?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Zach. We'll call you back.
I'm sure.
And you're still under oath.
Be careful with that. This is a public meeting.
Okay, so moving along on our agenda is this committee discussion, and we'll start with the DOE SR budget and process. So the core of this presentation is presented every year, so I'm familiar with the gist of it, though I was not there for this specific presentation. So from those that were there any surprises, sidebar conversations that should be reiterated at committee level?
Dan, I think what you said is pretty much spot on. It's pretty much the same we had, and I think Zach alluded to it in his part of the meeting. They got these numbers about what you said about an hour after the meeting, so these numbers are new.
Yep.
So, yeah. So we really didn't. It was pretty much what you said, the typical presentation.
Okay. So Gil, also pointing out those numbers, I actually didn't digest those as of yet, and seeing where critical items like salt stones being cut while SWPF is going up seems counterproductive and sets us in a very short path of success, and we'd have to throttle it way back to let the infrastructure catch up with the processing capability.
And my fear, Dan, is, and I know it's apples and oranges, but I'm worried that SWPF is going to become a hot button issue in local. Well, look, we spent all this money on it, we can't even get it running, or it's not even running, and we spent all this money on it. Well, so we're not funding. I don't want to use the term mocks because it's not in our purview, but there's a lot of problems wrong with it, and it became just a punching bag. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of it, and we don't know because we don't get briefed on that stuff, but it became a punching bag, and that's the last thing SWPF needs to become, is a punching bag for people who don't understand what's going on. And if we don't have those if Jim doesn't get new SDUs, he has a great facility with nowhere to process stuff to. So now I guess I'm just beating a dead horse here, but I'm going to continue to beat it.
Okay, so Dan Kaminsky, CAB. So I'm looking at it kind of from a hierarchy level. I don't know if Savannah River has done any analysis on the budget impact as to when critical path would say you're going to have to shut down SWPF because you have no more storage space. Is it something I need a recommendation for, or can you do that analysis and give us a timeline as to when those things intersect?
Yeah, Jim Folk, DOE. That's not something we would need a recommendation on. We certainly do those kind of studies all the time. So what you're going to find when you kind of look into some of the details from the liquid waste side, remember back to the purpose of the FY19 President's budget request. It was really to go from where we are, and if you remember our classic gear chart, we're going from processing about 1 million gallons a year up to a target of 9 to 10 million gallons. So basically, across the board, I need to be increasing my game in each of those facilities, whether it's preparation of feed, up to the salt side, sludge side, staffing. We've talked about 4.5 shift staffing. It's really across the board, and that's what you're going to find here. It's likely we would be able to keep operating all of these facilities, but we would not be able to achieve what we're really after, that maximum 9 to 10 million gallons a year. You'll see different references, for instance, with our dispute resolution agreement with the state of South Carolina. That was fundamental in that agreement, the fact that we would achieve those higher rates. So that's what you're really going to see as a delta here. We'll keep operating, but we'll end up having to scale things back and not be able to achieve the maximum we could. And that's the real delta between the President's budget request and these marks that you're seeing.
And that 9 to 10 million, is that output of SWPF or input from the tanks?
That's input. So, a 9 million in will probably equate to roughly 11 million or so coming out. That would end up going to the SDUs.
Okay, and SDU 7 is how big?
Pardon me?
Same size as 6.
I'm sorry.
STU 7 is the same size as 6, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, from this point on, SDUs 7 through 12 will all be pretty much cookie cutters of 6.
And the size capacity again, just refresh
About
my memory.
30 million gallons
30 million?
of grout. So there's a multiplier there from the decontaminated salt up to grout is about a factor of 2.
So 11 becomes 22.
Right. So for instance, there's about 15 million gallons worth of salt that we actually put in each SDU. Total volume of about 30 million gallons.
So about a year and a half capacity.
Exactly. 18 months. You're right on. About every 18 months, we would fill up an
We
SDU
need
once
it.
we hit it. Right.
And Dan, one of the things that we talked about in executive committee when we weren't there is Doug and I both had the opportunity to speak with EM3 or is it 4? EM3 or 4, and Steve Trishman, the budget guy, and they shared with us that what is really being looked at headquarters favorably across all sites is infrastructure. And so what Doug and I took away from the meeting, and I'm kind of throwing Doug in with me, but was when we start making recommendations, if it's deemed a recommendation, that we tie it to an infrastructure need. This is pretty easy to tie it to an infrastructure need, because if we don't have the infrastructure, SWPF can't move forward. And so, not that the Citizens Advisory Board is here to support DOE, but we can help DOE with our recommendations when we see fit. And it help SR DOE, I guess is the way to say it, help Savannah River. And I see this as an opportunity to write a recommendation to say we need this infrastructure, or the money that's been invested in SWPF was invested in vain. Because we have this beautiful system that's going to go live, knock on wood, in December or January, and we have SDU 6. Well, you know what? 18 months after it goes live, we're going to need another one. And then 18 months later, we're going to need another one. And 18 months later, we're going to need another one. And if they don't fund that other one, we just spent, what was the total cost on SWPF? $2 billion?
$2 billion.
Yeah, we just spent $2 billion to shut it down.
What's the construction time on the
It's about 2.5 years, I think, is what we're looking at.
Right. I mean, we're looking at it.
When would
or behind?
when would SDU 7 be filled? Complete rather, under the current timeline.
I don't have that one with me. We have a table we can provide that lays out right off of the system plan the exact construction and operating time for each of those SDUs. So I don't have that with me, but we can certainly provide it. But what we've said before is that out of the entire liquid waste program, again, assuming we fund it where we ought to be, the SDUs are the overall critical path. I'm waiting on those SDUs to be constructed and ready to go. So overall, that is my critical path.
So just a question: when the budget's submitted, is critical path ever shown?
It's described in the narrative that goes with things.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
Bob Smith, Cab. Just sort of a point of clarification, though. I understand what Gil's saying, and I agree with it, but what is really defined as infrastructure? To me, infrastructure is going to be roads and water and the kinds of things like that, but I don't necessarily see the tanks as being part of the infrastructure, or being considered infrastructure.
Yeah, Jim Folk again. And you know, earlier in the previous session, we talked a little bit about infrastructure, and we tried to identify inside the fence and outside the fence. So the outside the fence is the kind of stuff that Zach and company are mostly focused on for the roads and commodes, right, that are common to the site. For the inside the fence kind of stuff, it's what I need to run the liquid waste program as an example, right? So you're right, in normal terms, you don't think of a disposal facility as infrastructure, but yet it's so key in the whole process. I cannot run for long if I don't have a disposal facility.
And really, Bob, what we're borrowing off of and looking at other sites and how they've had budget requests, be it Hanford and stuff, this is how they're getting their money.
I understand. My comment was only just to make sure that we understand the ramifications of the wording, and because we can make all the suggestions in the world and call it infrastructure, but if they don't consider it infrastructure, then it's going to be pointless.
It's wasted, yeah. They consider,
But I agree with your point, and I also agree, you know, it ties in with yours.
Yeah. And
You've invested a lot of money and a lot of effort to be able to handle this process. And if you don't have the downstream facility to store it, then what's the point of doing all that?
Right.
And you've demonstrated the savings from 6 of building it, and you're going to cookie cutter those, so you hopefully would see some savings in addition to that for those.
so, Zach, is there a prescribed definition of what we're looking at when we say infrastructure? Is it all equipment and facilities, rather?
So we have what we call like program infrastructure, kind of what Jim Polk just kind of described. And then we have what is also called common infrastructure, and that's the stuff that's funded via the indirect, the road, the bridges, the source systems. Then it kind of varies from there. With the start of this PBS 42, its actual name is Infrastructure and Land Management. Headquarters hasn't made a very clear picture of what all that PBS is supposed to encompass yet. So right now we have an EOC in there, and that's part of infrastructure. And we have, I believe, the D area ash basin. That's infrastructure item for PBS 42. So it gets kind of muddled right there. You know, even kind of further convoluted it. Like you have what within security, some of that what we call IT stuff, like support. There's even some stuff in there. So it gets a little messy, but in general, like if you're wanting to talk about it and kind of want to make sure what we know we understand, you can just say program infrastructure and then the common infrastructure, and we'll have a pretty good idea exactly what you're talking about.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but our infrastructure requirements for liquid tank waste and stabilization and disposition was all under 14 Charlie, and more or less that's where these funds are coming out of, is 14 Charlie, correct?
If it's within the fence, it's kind of the draw line. I think there's a couple very small like puts and takes there, but generally, like if it's inside the fence, it's within the 14 program.
Okay. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Narinder.
Narinder Malik, Cab. I thought infrastructure within the fence for the project is supplying the power lines, communication system, and the roads, because you need to move from one SUD to SUD to another SUD, so you need to have the piping systems and all kind of other related structures to support the project.
So, like I said, there's some puts and takes, and we're just trying to make this like I said, it gets really messy. It's not very nice and neat. We even have a pool. It's called UBS. It's the unit billing system where folks kind of pay per computer and stuff. So like a program, say 14C, some of their users for the subcontractor, they have, it's a pay by the drink. And we have these different computers, and they pay like a monthly, we'll just say a subscription for that. And there's even some money that kind of goes in there that kind of crosses into the building. So it generally speaking is the way that, in the big ticket items, the things that are going to cost the most money and have the biggest impacts is if it's within the inside the fence, and if it's like a melter or an evaporator or something like that, something that Jim Folk will probably consider like an infrastructure item. It's going, I know that's not Jim's program, but you know, those big ticket items that he would consider infrastructure, that's going to be happen out of his program dollars. If it's like a road leading up to his building, or if it's a fiber line leading up to his buildings that's outside the fence, it's going to be in that general infrastructure. I know, like I said, there's some puts and takes, but again, that's generally how we categorize it.
Dan Kaminsky, Cab. So an observation that I have with regards to how this has gone with now the released 2019 Senate and House line item cuts, and, well, in one case, line item add. But that being said, annually we put out our IPL recommendation letter, and it clearly has stated, since I've been on the cab, that the liquid waste processing and disposition is the most critical, most important to this board. And clearly the House is not getting that message, because why would anyone take what we as citizens believe to be a highest priority and cut it by $30 million when, not saying that other things should be cut on here, but other things went completely unscathed. So that sends a little bit of an alarm to me. And I don't know what this cab can do to assist DOE in getting that message out. I do have one question on that. When the budget is presented, is our letter presented in some sort of context or appendix with that budget request, or is that just rolled into DOE's prioritization of our PBSs in the IPL?
So the way that we work, we submit everything up through headquarters, and we do submit that letter. We document and we submit it up with the requirements and stuff, and say, hey, and we just put it as an attachment. What happens after it there, I'd have to follow up and see how far that goes down the pipeline. But and I know we kind of, I said this once, but just when we're looking at it, we're right. We did get cut from the 19 budget's request, or the presidential's request. But you always kind of look back at that 18 number, and these requests and stuff, they're built off what we think is the need. Like, so we're going to be operating more, so we need more money. But if you look at it from 18 to 19 to the marks, it's still a plus up in a lot of these programs and stuff. So don't get me wrong, this is not a pretty picture here, but it is an overall plus up. So just kind of bear that in mind.
We'll go with Doug. You had his card first.
Doug Howard, Cab. I think I brought this up before here at one of our subcommittee meetings, but back in the day, the way the military would look at things, the infrastructure, because it was such an ignored, I guess, commodity that everybody kind of glanced over and didn't pay any attention to, and as they saw it begin to fall to the wayside, then they began to put that up front in requesting money, and then when those things got paid off, and then the critical things like the weapons for soldiers, tanks and ammunition and all of that, and that's when they went back to Congress and said, look, we need money for this. And that really hit some alarm bells with those folks up there in Congress. I don't know how they could do it like that, but I mean, sometimes you have to do things to get the message across.
We'll work our way around the table. Joyce.
Joyce Underwood Cab. I don't know who I'm asking this question to exactly.
You said
So, you know-
exactly.
Exactly. Oh,
But
that's for you in YouTube land. Anyway, okay, so things inside the fence often have like timelines of like how effective they're going to be, you know, like lifespans. Do the outside the fence things have lifespan data that we could look at? Is that a thing that is that a thing you have?
So, yeah. So we actually have probably more data than we know what to do with, honestly, and a lot of this stuff. And it's constantly looked at. It goes into reports, kind of to what you're saying. We paint this picture consistently and constantly. And it really hasn't changed much in the past few years, kind of where we're at. The overall narrative is we have a site that was built in the 50s, and we're riding on a lot of that infrastructure. So kind of coming back to your specific question, we have this catalog, and this is more facilities related, but it kind of captures some of that stuff, where we have every single facility on the site, you know, knock on plus or minus a couple little things, is captured through this database, and it has the square footage, like if it's contaminated, what it is, its replacement cost, how many years it's been serviced, and it kind of links to deferred maintenance on there, and there's a whole nother list that kind of compiles into there, and then there's all these calculations that go into based that some of the contractors perform, that based off of how long this has been operating, we're at such and such risk. There's a whole type of risk database that kind of over layers on it. So all those things are looked at. Is the shorter answer.
So somewhere out there's a list of like your high priority needs as far as
Oh
outside.
yeah. No, absolutely.
defense.
There is yes, there is a list of high priority needs, and like, you know, our IPL would be a pretty decent reflection on that.
Okay. I have another question kind of relating to something both of you said. You getting this parking lot redone by the Army?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way that you could do more of your infrastructure needs in that way, that you could get them on the cheap?
So it's we can't demand. That's
We
the thing.
can't.
So it's definitely much a sales show. So like we have a site liaison. His name's Toby Striblin. He works for the state. He does a great job. But what he and I have done in the past is, and we've actually had help with the contractor and through DOE, is we build this kind of catalog of different projects and stuff like that, based off their skill sets, things that we think they can do. But it's ultimately up to that unit to say, hey, that looks neat, I want to do that one. So it's very tough to say, hey, you know, we got to pave Road 4, you should do that for us. It just doesn't work that way. It's very much so like we have to entice them, not entice them, that's probably a bad word, but it has to be an attractive project from a training perspective for them.
Well, how is that presented to the Department of Defense? Is it like per unit, or how does that work?
So we have a relationship with the South Carolina National Guard, and from the top down at the guard level, they're very well vested. We talked about like how we're looking at the 750 acres going to the South Carolina National Guard, and so that relationship continues to grow. So there's probably some things that happen on their end, like the command of the South Carolina National Guard says, hey, commanders, that you need to come look at these different projects. But from our perspective, it's us presenting these different projects to them, and then that commander selecting.
So it's only going through the South Carolina National Guard.
Yeah, at this point.
Is there any way to expand that?
I'm sure there is, but we're just not at that level of maturity yet with this. You got to think, like, this first happened like 3 years ago, and this was, I don't want to say first of a kind, but no one's really heard of this stuff before, and we had to like get through a lot of different obstacles to make this happen. It's not a kind of a widespread thing that you have a National Guard unit under the training banner performing work for a different agency.
I'm just
Or
throwing
what
it
we
out
would classify
there.
as work.
There's an engineering battalion at Fort Stewart. They
No.
build roads.
No, I promise you, we're very, very well. I'm very well aware of like all the different units and their capabilities, but you got to think, engineers are in very high demand. Especially this past year, you had several different hurricanes and stuff. What are some of the first units that deploy? to these. It's the engineers, and those are the same folks. As much as I love the infantry soldiers, as far as like we're concerned, we don't want them building any bridges or anything like that. It's these very specific units, and they're in demand, and it's tough to get these folks. And so the South Carolina National Guard, through that relationship, they've kind of made this a priority but for a Fort Stewart, an active duty unit that's kind of like deploying all over the world, preparing to go to Afghanistan, Syria, building infrastructure, we're probably pretty low on their priorities. We've tried though. We've tried. It's just you got to dangle that carrot, and you got to hope that you get a bite, and it's getting the bite is the tough part.
David, question.
Dave Vabankas, CAB. Zach, I noticed that, I just was pulling this up, I noticed that with the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that passed the House, there's an accompanying House report. Does the House report, do you know, explain any of the rationale for the differences between the PB and the MARC?
Very, very high level. Typically what happens is we actually have to go back and communicate through our headquarters like, hey, what are they trying to do here? Like, I can't get into the specifics on this yet, but for instance, this has been a recent conversation within PBS 20, that $10 million, $10 million was allocated to a line item, and then there was that $10 million. That the House had a very specific idea in mind when they took that $10 million from PBS 20. But it typically takes us going back and communicating through our headquarters that are talking to the different staffers and stuff to get like a concrete idea of what they're doing here. I mean, we can get little glimpses, but it's not the full story.
Thank you.
Okay, so wrapping up discussion on this particular presentation, does anyone on the board see any recommendations that can come out of this? One that jumped to my mind was potentially should a recommendation even be needed for the IPL recommendation letter that we drafted and approved by the full board this year, accompany the appeal to the House? And that seems like a reasonable request to have it straight from the Citizens Advisory Board's lips as to our priorities and the concern that they've made the biggest mark cuts in our area of concern.
Narendra Malik, CAB. I think it's a good idea, but need to be given serious thought about that, and the wording has to be very carefully drafted so that that we stay on that track.
So when would the appeal actually occur?
The decision on the appeal, or the process of the appeal?
Both.
So we're already working through the process of the appeal. It's a lengthy. It's a lengthy process, or it can be lengthy, depending on what's going on. And the final is I think when the budget is finalized through the House and the Senate and then passed on. So I can't tell you when that is. But there's one point, I'm not 100% sure whether your IPL letter goes all the way through or not. So I just want to, don't assume one way or the other. I'm going to get the answer for you, but just don't assume that it just doesn't happen yet. I'm just not sure. So I am going to follow up with that, though, and I'll get it emailed to James pretty quick so he can forward that on to you.
So just, James, a quick question. Would that need to be in a form of recommendation? It seems kind of nebulous from the purview versus what we're asking, because we're almost stepping out saying we're not only just recommending it to DOE, which is our purview, we're recommending DOE take what we recommended.
I don't know if that's necessarily where it becomes out of your purview, where you're recommending something out of DOE. I think the question is has the department asked for input on their appeals process? So I don't know that that's necessarily the element that's in your work plan. So that's what we would have to go take a look at. While they have asked you for an IPL letter and they've given you the budget and they've asked for your thoughts on the budget, I don't know that they've necessarily asked for your thoughts on how they conduct their appeals to the House. So that's what we would have to take a look at. So I'll get you an answer.
James, it would have to be a recommendation, though, because that's the way we communicate to DOE.
Outside of requests for information, yes, it would have to, if it were to go through, it would have to be a recommendation in that form.
Right. I mean, that's the only way we can make it public. I mean, the request for information isn't public knowledge.
Well, and you can make requests for information all the time.
Right, but
You don't need a rec for that, but I think this would go beyond that
agreed.
and probably would have to be, you probably have to formalize it in some sense, and that would be the recommendation.
So it would be 4 months away. Well, possibly 3.
Well, 2. Could be 2. I mean, well,
Well,
for
we would
full
have,
board,
we'd have to
right.
draft it, meet in their next committee meeting,
Approve it,
approve it,
take it.
full board. That's 3 months, and then it would be in DOE's hands 3 months from now. Is it a lengthy enough process that 3 months would work for us?
Maybe.
Way to commit there, Zach. Way to commit.
Jim Folk, correct me,
Sure.
Zach. The appeal goes to the conference,
Yes.
correct? So you guys know as well as us when the conference would occur between the House and the Senate. That's where these numbers would get addressed for any change. So, you know, you can play that out probably in a normal time frame. You're talking about July, August, when those conferences happen. So that's probably the schedule you're up against.
David?
The past few years, conferences have been a rarity. So, but with the omnibus, what usually happens is the leadership makes most of the decisions, and whereas with regular order, they work through each of the subcommittees, and then they do go to conference. But that hasn't been the case recently.
Okay, so from this committee, do we have any volunteers to start drafting a shell of a recommendation along the lines of our IPL recommendation letter accompanying this appeal and future budgetary requests? And then we can all chime in with some input. James, we are allowed to some degree to kibitz on the draft, right? But as long as the draft comes here for final.
Absolutely, yes, you can do that.
All right. So I'm willing to work on it as part of the team. Do I have anyone else who will join me? Narinder? Thank you.
Actually, Dave should be good at that. He's good at numbers.
Well, we'll certainly be consulting with Dave. All right, so for the sake of time, let's move on. So did anyone else have a recommendation that they saw out of this presentation or our discussion? Okay, tying that into another topic that was at the full board, which was the pension budget. It's my understanding that passed unanimously, correct?
It did.
Yes.
Okay. Any surprises, any additional comments out of that? I would have expected little or none. Okay. Recruitment and retention. Evidently you enjoyed 3 presentations from the different agencies out there at the site. I had 2 quick questions. Since it's almost a public view of next generation workforce, has there been any aged people, such as myself, looking for employment there that have taken exception to that?
I'll take an exception.
Yeah, next week.
Awesome.
I did slip in on this at work, like Carol Berry, SRS. You mean current employees take exception to it?
Or candidates?
Well, you know, when you look at the average age of what we're hiring, at least speaking for SRNS, is currently at 38 You know,
Okay,
so I'm.
okay. You're
it's
still
really-
hiring a broad range,
Oh,
not
yeah,
just
it'd be a
college
huge
grads.
mistake if all we hired was CCGs, because you'd end up with the same situation 25 years hence. So we're really actively going after, actually right now specifically in the engineering, I'm putting together a lot of materials to try to get more of the middle level. We're doing really well, but we're trying to hire more engineers, so we're really going after some of the, meetings that they've got, the different organizations, to try to recruit in that kind of way. So, but yeah, my average age has stayed at 38, 39 in terms of what we hired since FY14. So we're doing a really good job on that. And actually, there's a slide in there that shows that shift. We've got 5 generations represented,
saw that.
and you see that shift. And so it's a very slow shift, but we're getting there. So no, I
Excellent.
don't. I mean, you don't really see that. Occasionally, you'll have folks say, "All you care about is hiring," and this is not appropriate. You know, like young people, absolutely not.
Okay.
So
No, that's good to know, because that's obviously was a perception I had, and being an old guy myself, who
right. And I
was
am
wondering
very
if I had
old.
career
My birthday
opportunities.
was yesterday, so you know.
Happy
So,
birthday. Don't lose your job, brother.
But no, we really, we really do that. I mean, I hired a benefits manager 4 years ago who was late 60s. So
nice.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's hope for me.
right, you got a
He
second.
jumped on it nice.
You like that?
Nice.
You have another question?
Yes, I did. And then just the other general question I had was, overall, how do we feel? Are we on track for recruitment? Are we filling the gap of retirees?
We
And-
feel very good about that. I didn't talk into detail with that. Right now, I've got 53 future report to works, where we have 44 plus 25 for non-exempt positions currently in comp. I think 44 were in RadCon, 25 were Tritium production operators. They're in comp right now to set salaries. We've had extremely good luck. We're in a bit of a ramp up right now. We'd held off earlier in the year waiting to see what happened with the budget, but we're on track. And where we have some targeted areas, we're busy putting in some programs. We're working on an IH program, working with 3 branches of the military, working with USC-Aiken, because that way we don't have to travel far to get candidates. So, we've been able to fill the gap, and actually, and to be very honest, as you see people like to talk about that retirement cliff, and it's really not appropriate to talk that way. I don't like to give people the data on how many people are eligible, because just because a person's eligible to retire doesn't mean they're going to. A lot of factors play into that, and a lot of them are private and personal.
I was personally happy to see my neighbor finally retired at 76.
Well, right. So I think one of the things, though, that we have seen over time, a couple things, and this is partly an observation, a lot of it I can't really prove, but I've worked out there. I'm in my 31st year, and so I understand the human behavior aspect. I'm a student of that. But when we weren't hiring for so long, people feel very loyal out there to the work that they do, and they don't want to leave people in the lurch. Like, they're going to have to take on my job because nobody's getting hired. Well, now that we're hiring, you're starting to see that. And now that you've had a lot of new folks on board, people are like, well, they're very capable people, and so I can go to that next phase of life. So I really, I call it that circle of life. I think now that we've been able to have the budget to hire, and doing that is getting us back to a normal behavior that we hadn't seen in years and years. I came full service in '89. I had worked prior in construction when I was going to college and grad school. And we saw that big surge when we built up to about 26,000, and then we just didn't hire a lot. And so we never knew what the behavior what normal behavior was out there. And as you see the contract end date moving and changes like that, people that might have said, well, I'm going to work till the end, so people were worried about that being a cliff. Well, now you're seeing a steady flow of people leaving, but you also see a steady flow of people coming in. So I think we're able to work that overlap so people get a lot of that knowledge transfer in different ways. So I think we feel real good about that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate the input.
All right.
Around the table?
Doug Howard Camp. Ironically, last week during the public tour, there was a young lady, seemed to be in her mid-30s. She was an engineer, and she was looking to get employment out at SRS. So she seemed very enthusiastic. Matter of fact, James talked to her also. So hopefully she's going to get employed out there.
Hopefully she will, right?
Good.
You know, and I'm always happy to know, you know, I like to tell people how to go to Brass Ring, watch those job opportunities. Now, actually in engineering, they have 2 requisitions we're able to leave open constantly because that's an area we need to keep hiring. And so there's always a requisition out there for entry-level and mid-level engineers. So she needs to put that in.
Thank you. Anyone else? Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, Cab. How do I phrase this? Is there any effort, I guess, on the site to make people who are not from this area aware that they're here and they're hiring? Because I've met several people who have recent transplants, and if they hadn't talked to me, they don't know what SRS is or that they have jobs. And they're very educated people who could work there.
Well, so we did do information pods, but we stopped doing those, Kristen, 2 years ago, I think would be about right, maybe 2 to 3 years ago. So we did that. I know that we have representatives speaking at public meetings, and certainly in the paper. Our jobs are posted. It's on Facebook. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we have our jobs out there. So.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if people who aren't from here and they see an SRS job posted, if they don't know what that is, like, how would you educate those people? Like, they might just gloss over it. And I don't know if that's a problem you can solve. It's just a thought.
I don't know that that's a problem I can solve, and then one of the reasons I'll tell you it's not really a problem from my perspective is I'm not lacking for applicants for positions. So at this point, you know, we did the info pod because we felt like it was a way to create, you know, really, to your point, people don't know what we do out there. They might not have the information, and those went really, really well. But that's a huge effort to continue to sustain because the same people that were doing those are very busy with a lot of the tours, and we have increased those exponentially. So I see it as something that we did for a period of time, and it worked really well for us, and potentially we would do it again. But again, it's like a cyclical effort when you've got issues. When we do outreach at Aiken Tech and some other areas, we keep in touch. We have certain individuals that are over certain areas of responsibility, like maintenance and E&I mechanics and all. We stay in close touch that way, and that's how we do get word out in the jobs. We work very closely with the universities and colleges and the tech schools. So I think it'd be something we did do. It worked really well for us, and I see us probably pulling that out at some future point. But you know, we do as much social media as we can and advertise those jobs out there. But I see your point, and we can certainly talk about it as something we do again with info pods. But again, some of those were well attended and some hardly at all. So there was a big effort to put those together. So, but it's not been an issue in terms of having applicants. I mean, I had 2 entry-level HR jobs. We had almost 500 applicants for each of them, and I had over 150 that qualified. And we had to sort through all those so that I think both of them ended up interviewing, or in the process of interviewing 8 people because we had so many qualified applicants. So it's partly why it's not perceived as a problem on our part.
It's a good problem.
It is a very good problem, I would agree. We're in a very sweet spot that, you know, having worked out here as long as I have, and I'm born and raised in Aiken. My dad was long-term DOE AEC, started with AEC. So, you know, I have a passion for what I do. I never dreamed that I'd be in a position to be able to say my goal is, before I ever think about retirement, is to hire, you know, at least 2,500 people, and I'm getting close to 2,200 right now. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, Jim Folk, DOE. I'll just remind you, Lee Moody from DOE presented, and part of his conversation was they do go out on recruiting trips. So we've sent people to Jacksonville, to, you know, with the Kings Bay area, we're sending people to the shipyards, where we, you know, when you look at some of the people we're primarily looking for, facility engineers, facility reps, kind of the direct oversight of operations. That is something that Lee has taken on as initiative for the DOE side, to get out and try to recruit some of those people.
Well, we do heavy recruiting, but I think you were referring really for local, or?
People who are transplanted, you know, because we're a military community, so there's spouses.
Right.
And I'm a spouse. The only reason I'm here is because I have a personal vested interest in nuclear energy separate from this. And that's the only reason I know that you're here,
So
is because
we're-
I did my own personal research.
We're real close to rolling out a resource on our website that is for partner support, and we do offer, I forget right now what the amount is in our relocation for, so if we hire someone and they have we call it a trailing spouse coming with, we offer a certain amount of support for resume writing and all kinds of things. So that's part of it.
Well, my concern is more for the spouses of people who've come here for other reasons.
For other things.
And if they don't meet one of us, they're going to not really know that SRS is there, or that they're a viable
So
employment
if you
option.
have suggestions when you're speaking of that, I'd be more than happy to
I
hear them
don't know,
to
but
try.
it was just something that popped into my head. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't have television. I don't know who does. I don't know if you guys run commercials like SRS is here. Like, I don't know how people who aren't from here, who don't have a history in the area,
Mhm.
would know that it's here unless they were searching nuclear energy things. I don't know how you find out about it. I guess that's my bigger question, just conceptually.
Okay. I think a lot of people do, because so many people do work at the site or have worked at the site. And we get, when we post jobs, we do put that out there and tell people how to go out there. But it's possibly an argument to do some sort of another, community type event where we invite people to educate them about the work
second from
available.
last page also had a nice map of some of the college recruiting.
I mean, we
at least
do.
the southeast portion of the states is very well represented there.
I don't know that this is an employment issue so much as a just community issue.
It
How many people
feels
do you talk to
community.
as a member of the CAB that have any idea what SRS is before you talk to them?
I had no clue it was here. When I moved
Exactly. Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. That's my point.
Yep.
More so than recruitment, I guess. So maybe this isn't under
Well,
your
and,
purview.
well, it was a big effort, and that is why they did the info pods, and they really got a great deal of benefit out of that, but then, and that was really towards the beginning of our heavy hiring effort, and I think it served a great purpose. I think, to your point, maybe it's something to think about doing, maybe not every year, but maybe every other year or something, having one or two of those. It's a thought, and something I would pass on to the folks that look at the community outreach portion.
Well, let me ask this. Is there anything like, because I've never been, in the local Chamber of Commerce in the 5 counties that mentions SRS? Because I just genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, the
Oh,
Chamber of
yes,
Commerce.
definitely.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I was recruited to the CAB through the chamber.
Oh, well, there you
Right.
go.
The chamber definitely does.
Well, I mean, maybe you're doing everything that you need to do. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, right? So.
Well, true, but I mean, I have mentioned recently talking about different things. Maybe it's time again to maybe do an info pod or two. That was a very heavy effort. It was very successful. I participated probably strongest in one that was at Aiken Tech, and it was a great experience. It's something I don't forget, because I was able, and it really does ring true what you're saying to some aspect. I was talking to, and it was a group of young men who were in a specific program, and they had a whole lot of questions for me about what entry-level pay was in certain jobs, and they had no idea that, I can go out there and I can maybe, buy my mom a house and things like that. It was very poignant to me, and it made me think, well, maybe we could do another one of those. It really got folks interested in gaining employment out there. Now, a different thing we're doing right now, because I do see a lot of the importance of doing education outreach within our high school. We've got a lot of young people that may not have family members pressing them to, there's opportunities for you and a way to be successful, particularly if they have never worked out there or don't have an understanding. And so we have a great deal of activity taking place working with high school students, and it's been, getting them to understand programs in the area that they can attend both 2 and 4 year and maybe seek employment. And we're having some luck with that. I had a group of people that work with me down in the Low Country. I can't remember what, it's part of the Promise Zone effort we're in, and they're doing a lot of outreach that way, giving people interviewing skills and tips on their resume. And so we do a lot. It's a matter of number of people to do a lot of those things. So different things happen in different cycles. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
So going around the table, anyone seeing any recommendations that need to be drafted for the outcome of this presentation? Did you have any areas that you wish to see some additional input? Seems like it's fairly well covered.
It is, but I'm always open to input, so.
Yeah, you see, Joyce.
What about what I was talking about?
Is there anything in there that you feel You can mull it over and...
Yeah, I'm all on.
Any other discussion around the table? All right, moving on to the next presentation was the Natural Resources Management Plan. This is one I'm least familiar with, so I'm hoping that our committee members will chime in as to what was of interest to the CAB and if there are any outstanding questions, input, or recommendations to follow up on.
Dan, I believe Doug has it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey,
Doug.
Dave. Doug Howard Cap. Greg Murray and I, we had discussed, we talked about the feral hogs. There was a great presentation they gave us, about all of that. But we did a little research, and I think James said they're going to have another presentation in September.
Yes.
Where we're going to get some additional information on there, because we may have some interest in maybe doing a recommendation on some feral hog stuff, but we'll see what comes out of the presentation in September, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
I think that presentation will be by Dr. Hogzilla. I mean,
Can you use the microphone, Miranda, please?
Yeah, we need to get Hogzilla on the record. No? All right, anyone else? Okay, so that moves us into open recommendations. We have number 351, I believe it is, open, and we received the response literally as we were adjourning 2 months ago. That being said, could we just jump down to the recommendations, please? Hopefully everyone is reasonably familiar with this recommendation. So basically the outcome recommendation was work with the Savannah River National Laboratory to evaluate how direct base funding from the federal budget for stability purposes could be requested and established, and evaluate the lab to determine what budget projections would be needed for base funding. So basically this was a recommendation that the CAB, for some of our newcomers, this was a recommendation based on the fact that the lab's funding was coming as portions, not really as a tax, but kind of underlying funding, bits and pieces from the different PBSs out there. And it was suggested that maybe it would be more solid and they could do more good things if they had a baseline funding that was more under their control and not necessarily at the beck and call of the PBS owners. So that was our recommendation, and could you jump over to the response, please? Okay, so was this was broadcast actually quite a while ago, right?
Yes.
So I'll vouch for everyone here. You probably read it when you first got it, but it's been so long that you might not remember what you thought about it. So basically, thank you for your recommendation, SRNL funding. In its continuing effort to advance SRNL as the Office of Environmental Management National Laboratory and take full advantage of its federally funded Research and Development Center role, the Department of Energy Savannah River Operations Office has already contemplated the need to establish base funding to support operations, maintenance, and infrastructure. DOESR explored the opportunity to establish a project baseline summary for SRNL in 2018 and 2019, but continuing resolutions and other budgetary and organizational restraints did not support the effort. DOESR will continue to reveal the concept of base funding for SRNL in the future. We will keep you informed of our efforts as we move forward. So this is kind of complementary in a sense that this is what DOE has been trying to do behind the scenes, and continuing resolutions obviously has a very negative impact on budget planning and hasn't been conducive to make it happen. I'm looking at it, but I'd like to know your ideas, thoughts, comments first. David?
Dave Lavacas, CAB. I have a question that I didn't do the investigation until recently, and Zach, maybe you can help with this. I don't know, do you do any budget formulation for SRNL?
So SRNL is done via the indirects, so it's controlled by our indirect team. I am on that team, so I am kind of, but it's not like what we call budget formulation is more the direct side, and then working through the congressional and headquarters to get us the money. That's what we call budget formulation.
When I go out and look at the DOE website and look at the legislation or the appropriation history for SRNL does appear, and it looks like in FY17 the enacted was $8.6 million. In FY18 the budget was about $5.5 million, and then the request for FY19 is $841,000. Just
I'd have to go look at that.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure. You said Savannah River National Lab?
yes.
For especially those low dollar amounts. I don't know off the top of my head what that could be.
Okay.
Any further discussion on this response? Does anyone feel it's inadequately addressed or feels that we should move forward with closure?
So moved.
Or keeping it open?
No, you said for closure.
I said or.
I move that we accept DOE's response to recommendation 351 SRNL funding.
Do you have a second?
I second it.
Okay. So we'll move that to a vote.
Oh, we get to use the clickers.
We get the clickers. Do I get the extra ones too?
Please no.
Dead
Vote early,
people.
vote once.
Dead people vote.
So to be clear, the motion on the screen, vote to forward recommendation to the next full board meeting for closure. Sorry, I think I said we are closing it, but obviously we're only recommending for closure. Okay.
Number 5 is right here.
I think we're good.
You do it.
Number one.
Late.
Did you want to vote, maybe?
I didn't because I wasn't on this committee.
Right, so we can go ahead and close it.
Ooh, it's a vote.
Okay. Unanimously.
Unanimously.
Wow.
Okay,
Darn, I
so
thought somebody would
so
vote.
moved. We will move that for full closure at the next full board meeting.
Is
And
this the
before-
first response we got from Mike Budney? Is this the first response we got from Mike Budney?
I think so.
Oh, we should frame it.
Well, it's just interesting. It's a different format. I just noticed that.
Oh yeah, normally it reiterates.
I like it.
It's fine with me. Okay, so our next meeting, August 14th, 6:30 p.m. until 2:20 a.m. I mean 8:20 p.m.
Like Dr. Hogsilla.
And James, actually, could we explore that idea? Would that be allowable to
Unless you can send
do an overlap schedule?
I'm only,
So did we bring that up in this meeting?
No, we brought it up with
In the
you
last
after
meeting?
the last
you brought it
one.
up in between the.
So in the
budgets.
last meeting, since it ended on the early side, this meeting, because it's slated for 6:30, the committee members and myself needed to stay here another hour and a half before this meeting could even start. And what was suggested was if we scheduled the second meeting for, let's say, 5:45, if the first meeting did go long, we would just start the second meeting a little late, according to the schedule. That way, anyone who was anticipating, wanting to give public comment, they for sure would not miss the meeting. We have no latitude to pull that meeting time in. If it's posted at 6:30, it's going to be at 6:30. But if it's posted at 5:45 and we're still online, we could still remain on the line until the meeting starts, and public comment and public input could still be realized. So I don't know who makes that decision, but I'd love to move forward with it.
I think what we need to do is talk about it in the executive committee and then
Okay.
determine when you guys, if you want to enact it and when you would want to
I mean,
enact
we
it.
may have to wait till next year to do something like
and
this.
I say that because
Right. Yeah, since the
this
schedule's
topic or this idea comes up every year about this point in the year, but then when it comes time to make the schedule at the work plan meeting, it gets dropped. So
Yeah, and that might just be because it's not on everybody's radar. Because I literally, when I
So-
did our work plan, I was
you
strictly
were focused
looking
on
at the
some other stuff.
topics.
And that's understandable. So let's
And-
bring
and
it up in
not-
July and then figure out, if everybody's on that same page. And
In fact, is
what
it
we wanna
known
do.
when we're doing our work plan exercise that we either have the early or late slot?
Yeah,
Yes.
By
you
that
guys
time?
wanted
Yeah.
the late slot, that's why I got the early slot.
No, they
No, we
rotate.
flip flop every
They
year,
flip-flop.
but yeah,
I'll trade you back.
it's done.
We can't. It's already out there.
Yeah, see, that's my only hesitancy to answering your question like right now is
No, no,
because
that's
we
fine.
publish this.
Obviously,
for
things
months,
don't happen
so-
snapping the fingers. It's
Right.
just how do we start that process and
Let's talk about it in July.
get it some
For sure.
traction. Okay. All right. So with that, we can. If there's no further discussion around the table, we can open up for public comment. And I see no public here. Is there anyone online? Hearing none. This meeting's adjourned.